Okay, we are right at 2 o'clock. So I wanted to make sure that I took a second and introduced my esteemed panel today. I'm so happy to have these three amazing nurses to talk about virtual nursing. All three of you have had an amazing career throughout your lifetimes, and so I'm just grateful to be able to moderate this discussion. So I'll do what I can, but please make sure that we touch all of the important topics that folks will want to understand and hear. And for those that are attendees, please make sure to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. We'll monitor both. And we would love to hear your questions. That's the purpose of the webinars, to be able to provide you the best information that you can possibly get on this topic. So I am Michelle Hager. I'm the managing partner of Blue Sierras Consulting, and with me is Lisa May Williams, who's a PhD in RN. Dr. Williams is a visionary and healthcare leader with operational and clinical experience in the digital health policy and clinical operations space. She's a subject matter expert in telehealth program implementation and operations, leveraging telehealth resources to support care efforts for patients across the continuum. And her full bio is available on our website, as well as Dr. Rincon, Teresa Rincon, who is also a PhD in nursing, is a senior telehealth consultant with Blue Sierras Consulting. He's been leading teams in implementation, strategic planning for telehealth services, and evidence-based practice initiatives, clinical decision support, data collection, reporting methodologies, and building documentation and reporting in electronic medical systems for nearly 2 decades. Along with Teresa and Lisa May, Julie's bio is also available on our website, and Julie Reister is a seasoned healthcare leader with extensive experience in the nation's top 3 health systems, having led the development and implementation of their virtual care solutions, innovation plans, and care delivery strategies. And her background is multifaceted, spanning clinical, administrative, and product leadership. So we are so happy to have all 3 of you here. So thank you again for taking the time to talk with us about virtual nursing, an important topic. And in fact, this particular webinar is not usually scheduled in December. Usually we take a break, but the topic of virtual nursing is so important. We did a pop-up webinar, as we've called it, just to pull in one last hot time during the year. So let's talk a little bit about what we've seen in the news, in articles and research. We know that based on some of the research that is out there, the staffing shortages are extremely high. We've quoted those previously, somewhere in the order of 200,000 nurses that are not going to be available to us over the next few years. And this has a huge impact in not only clinical care, but also in clinician burnout, which we can talk extensively about as well. There's lots and lots of reasons why there's clinician burnout, but how do the impacts, and Teresa, I'll direct this question to you first, but how do the impacts in nursing practice, how are they affected by the nursing shortages and clinician shortages overall?
So the nursing shortage is impacting the practice of nursing in multiple ways. One is there's just not enough bodies at the bedside, which most people seem to understand. And most of our efforts are really being targeted at how do we get more nurses? How do we grow them up fast enough and faster and get them to the bedside? But one of the things we don't think about very often is the loss of knowledge when we lose expert nurses at the bedside, or when we water down, I guess you could say, the staffing mix to the point that we don't have enough expertise, and we're drawing on a minimal number of experts, or sometimes on a given shift, the most experienced nurse has 1 year of experience. And that's just not enough to get to proficient and expert. It takes about 1.5 years to become competent, and it takes about 3 years to be proficient, and sometimes up to 5 years to reach a level of expertise in any given practice of nursing. So there's specialties of practice of nursing, just like we see specialties in medicine.
has a huge impact. And I think what we've seen in utilizing virtual nursing is this is kind of the first line that people think about, that I've got a shortage, I might be using temp resources, and I might need to do something different with virtual nursing. But we know that there are a variety of different ways that virtual nursing can be utilized. Lisa May, I'll let you lead on this topic, but feel free to weigh in on the prior one as well. But when we talk about developing these programs, I often hear folks talk about, oh, we can take the admission discharge process off of the bedside nurse, which is a great first step. But how do we look at the various types of care frameworks and models that people should be thinking about and developing as they think about their virtual nurse program?
This is such an important question because potentiating the shortage is this turnover, especially the first year turnover. A recent report showed us that 22%, 22.5% turnover rate, and that's not a really sustainable number. Even though that 22.5% is a slight improvement over 2021, it's still above pre-pandemic levels in terms of that first year turnover. Why is that important? Because majority of our nurses that they come in, we expend a lot of energy and time bringing them up to speed to become confident, to become competent, and to critically think. And as Teresa pointed out, a year is really, you're just getting to the minimum surface of what is required. I particularly love the AACN Synergy model as a framework for developing a virtual nursing program because it helps us to understand the competencies that are required from our nurses based on our patients' needs. I have a statistic here I thought was very important, interesting, that in 6 years from now, 73% would be the increase in the number of baby boomers that will reach retirement. With our high first year turnover rate, that's not a good synergy climate, right? We have a huge gap based on the knowledge between what our nurses are able to provide, not through any fault of their own, and what our patients are going to need. So filling that gap with virtual nursing, helping to retain the talent, the knowledge, the expertise is crucial. And using that model to develop competency frameworks for our virtual nurses that is not limited to only tasks. We're able to leverage them as resources beyond, and we'll talk about scalability, but the fact that we have these nurses to be able to keep them within the profession, these experts, that's where that knowledge gap, competency gap needs to be focused with the virtual nursing piece.
Absolutely. Any follow-up to that, Teresa or Julie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we don't think about, we think about that loss of expertise and the potential that patients might be harmed because we put nurses in situations in which they may need to make a decision about something they've never experienced. And so then they make the wrong decision. So we really have a system that sets them up to fail when we don't have enough experts at the bedside. And then this leads to catastrophic mistakes in which patients can get harmed. But we often don't think about the fact that the nurse is harmed. In fact, we tend to, in healthcare, blame someone for making mistakes, and maybe we fire them or put them on disciplinary action, when in fact, we have a system that sets them up to fail. Having nurses working alone on a unit that the most experienced nurse has a year or 1.5 years of experience is a poorly designed system, in my opinion.
Yeah, really good point. And Julie, any final thoughts on that, or if Lisa May and Teresa covered it?
They covered it. I would just maybe quickly add, I think that there's just some, really innovative, practical tips that we can provide in terms of how to actually operationalize some of these, concepts that they've discussed. Having the ability to, change management is a big piece of it, but having the ability to have that kind of tap on the shoulder to someone who's an expert and who's readily available to help has been a really exciting way that we've been able to help some of the nurses, whether they be relatively inexperienced novice nurses or sometimes just that virtual tap for a second opinion, I think is really critical. And it's a lot of, there's just a lot of ways that we can really kind of operationalize and bring those things to bear. I think, like you said earlier, it's not just the low risk, high repetitive activities that we can help kind of take off the shoulders of the team, but really adding, a whole new team model for this and being able to deliver, a new approach to being able to take care of patients. One that, quite frankly, isn't really that new. It's that the problems have grown and grown, and the approach to help deal with that from a virtual nursing perspective started quite a long while ago. We just need to accelerate the adoption of that. And we've got a lot of, I think, great strategies and great experiences in terms of how to do that.
Right.
So you led me right where I wanted to go, which is how do we operationalize this? I think what we see in the market is there are a lot of vendors that are either have been in the virtual nursing space or emerging into the virtual nursing space, either from a software and hardware perspective or from a supplemental resource perspective. And I think what we're seeing in the market and the folks that are asking us questions are around, how do I make sense of this? How do I determine what should I do in my institution? I might be worried about the cost of my contract nurses, and I'm getting pressure to get rid of contract nursing, but I don't know if I should try to do this internally, or should I buy something from an external resource in terms of clinicians that can partner with me, or should I just look at the hardware and software solutions? So talk a little bit, Julie, about the build versus buy decision making that people might need to make, and some of the factors that you think about when, in your experience that you've been working on, what factors do you consider when you think about building versus buying a solution?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex set of decisions, and I think there's so many factors that have to be taken into that in terms of, whether it's a technology decision, whether it's a service delivery decision, what are kind of the primary out of the gate use cases that we could find some quick wins with, what's the, time element in terms of that buy versus build piece. And there's a lot of newer players in it. Certainly, Teresa and Lisa May and I, we've been together in this business for a long time. And the choices on the technology side were very, very limited, I think, when we started this, 15 plus years ago. So I think it's a process to go through, specifically on the technology side. And I would venture to say that there's a lot to consider beyond just two-way audio video. I think that there is a lot of ways that technology can help you scale a virtual nursing program. For example, there's no way that a EICU nurse could take care of 30 plus patients. EMED surge nurse could manage 50 plus. A remote monitoring nurse could handle 200 plus, unless there is other technology around it. So I would say that the technology decisions are complicated, and there are more choices. And I would just briefly touch on the service delivery side. I think back to the days when very quickly we ended up with a wait list of internal staff that wanted to join the virtual nursing team once they realized what it was all about. Now, granted, there may be a way to kind of seed your staff to get you out of the gate quicker. And in some cases, there may be a decision to, outsource the nursing piece of it. But again, I think there's some very important decisions that need to be made about that, and some risks depending on, which way you go. But I'd love to hear, more from, Teresa. It looks like I know both of you and Lisa may have a lot of experience in this also.
Are they chomping at the bit? Yeah, Teresa, go for it. Go ahead, and then Lisa May, I'll let you add, because I know this is a really important topic and something that both of you and all three of you are passionate about.
Yeah, I think both Lisa May and probably Julie too, we've all seen the mistakes made in decision making. Sometimes an organization already has a technology that would work for virtual nursing, and yet they pick another one on top of that without really examining what is the infrastructure like within their organization, where are they going to be deploying these tools or units from a technology standpoint, and who else might need to tap in and use those. Why would we want to use two-way audio video that can only be used, say, for virtual sitting? If I'm going to have a camera in the room, I want to be able to use that for multi-use and multi-purpose, right? As you grow your virtual programs, you may want to tap into using other expertise, not just someone watching the patient, but nurses providing virtual services, specialty providers being able to also use that same technology. So again, you have to think about the long-term strategy of how you're going to use the technology. And then from the human capital standpoint, if you're a small community-based hospital or health system with just a couple hospitals, it might be difficult to stand up a virtual nursing program and scale that to the point where it's going to be financially feasible. You'll get to a point where you're going to plateau. You may be in an area where there are not a lot of nurses, and the only way to get nurses in your virtual nursing area is to steal from the bedside. Now you have none at the bedside. So you have to think really about your human capital strategy. The large health systems, they're usually going to choose to use their own staffing models because they're big and they can afford it. They can set it up, they can scale it. So again, it is a decision you have to think strategically about and really consider all of your options. And you want to include your stakeholders, even those stakeholders you might not think would be interested, like I mentioned before. What about pharmacists? If you're having trouble getting pharmacists in your health system across the health system, they may want to use the virtual technology. So make sure you choose a technology that's going to meet future needs as well as what you're trying to solve at this moment. And then from that human capital standpoint, again, thinking about, are you going to be able to scale this, grow this, and where will you be able to pull nurses from?
Good point. Lisa May, anything to add to that?
Well, I know we're going to talk about ROI in a little bit more detail, but what I wanted to highlight for you all is, I made a list because I was thinking about if I had to stand up a virtual nursing program, what do I have to think about? And just as Teresa and Julie mentioned, thinking about the long-term solution, how you're going to scale is very important, but selecting the right technology and then the right people to work with on the program, it's essential. So I was thinking about this and said, let me write down factors that I would consider. I would select the right unit to deploy the virtual nursing in. Not every unit virtual nursing is applicable. You might have a unit that is functioning quite well, that adding virtual nursing is really going to be a complication rather than a help. So think about the right unit. Think about the best use case. So is it task oriented? Is it supplemental staffing? Is it going to be a team approach that you need to consider because you have a high number of less experienced nurses that you're going to leverage your virtual nurses to help supplement that piece? There's one hospital did a presentation recently I saw. They had a team approach. It was a trio. It was the virtual nurse, the on-site nurse, and the patient care tech. And the three had the same assignment. So that's one example. Also, the scalability to other areas for different needs. Are you going to have a code response team that's coming out of your virtual nursing team? What type of staffing are you going to consider? Is it going to be what we mentioned before, shared staffing, where you are going to take from the on-site team to staff your virtual team, or you're going to have an exclusive virtual team. That's something to think about. And then the competencies, as we mentioned earlier, of the nurses to deliver the synergy that is required. So not every nurse can be a virtual nurse, but I know a lot of nurses who want to work in the virtual space, but you have to select the right people. And then the KPIs that will be used to measure success. If you're already successful in one area, using virtual nurse to supplement, you might not see the ROI that you expect. And then we can consider other metrics, or revising, for example, the hours per patient day. Do we include virtual nurses in that calculation? And other examples that I read that I thought were interesting is the nurse perceived staffing adequacy. So now you have virtual nursing. Is this adequate? Is it providing us the support that we're asking for? And then another look to take a look at your CMI, your case mix index. How sick are your patients, and will having virtual nursing actually support the care of those patients? So that was my list. I know it was a little long, but
No,
I
it's
thought
good.
it was important to write that list down, because these are things that we've heard people talk about and ask about, and they're all important things to consider. And some will weigh heavily in your hospital versus another.
No, that's a great list. And I think one of the things we want to do is provide some practical, guidance in these webinars. And one of the things I was going to say around the idea of build versus buy, I think it's true for any organization. You all sort of touched on it, but getting your right stakeholders in play to decide what you're going to do. It is a nursing-led activity generally, but we want to make sure that telehealth is involved in that. Marketing is involved, HR is involved, and as you talked about, the human capital, in order to be able to make sure we get the right decision around what technology should be utilized. And I think in virtual nursing space, for example, when nursing is leading it, as they should, sometimes they forget, is there technology already in the building that we could take advantage of, rather than buying something completely fresh and new? And I know my IT professionals out there are probably thanking me for that one. But I've been there and done that. You find you're buying all of these different siloed technologies that you can actually utilize and should be able to utilize across your telehealth continuum. And I think another point that I think about when we consider the build versus buy solution, some people get a little bit apprehensive about bringing in third parties to do clinical care. And I understand that. And one of the things that we have advised organizations about is, and I think you mentioned it, Teresa, or at least I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not sure which one of the three of you, because you're all so smart, said this, but you at some point will, get to a diminishing return, and you've exhausted all of your options for your clinicians in your area, and now you're stealing from the actual arena that you're trying to solve a problem for. And these solutions and these companies are actually a great bridge. So you don't have to see them as a permanent solution for you, or a permanent fixture in your organization. You could get to the point where you're utilizing a third party just as a bridge, and know in your strategy, know in your planning that you're going to get, you're going to have a year or 2 years, however long you decided in your contract terms, that you're going to utilize that service, so that you can set up your policies and procedures, you can set up your processes, you can get past all of your bumps in the road, and you can do that with a partner, and then you can start to cycle out and utilize your own solution. So these are some of the things that we do when we're facilitating with organizations and helping them understand how to cycle up and cycle down partnerships, and also how to pick the right technology vendor, because there can be some big solutions, and sometimes you might not need as big a solution, or maybe you need a bigger solution and there's a lot to choose from, and you don't want to just purchase the Nike or Reebok of the world, because maybe Adidas is doing a great job. So there's a lot of different options that are out there in the market. We can certainly help you figure that out as well. And you mentioned a little bit, Teresa, around this idea of the human capital and harnessing the knowledge and the human capital that you have inside the organization. And I think we've seen this happen where it's not only the loss of that seasoned nurse, but it could be because they're on light duty and now, that could be an option that they're cycling into a virtual nursing solution. So how do we incorporate that targeted investment in nursing so that these are incorporated into the strategic planning of the organization? I think that's one of the things that we've been seeing is a lot of rush to a virtual nursing solution because it's a way to potentially get rid of contract staff or to, take admit and discharge. So off of the bedside nurse when we know that this, needs to proliferate even further. So how do we incorporate that into a larger solution and also into the organization's strategic plans? I'll let you start, Teresa. And I'll go to you, Julie.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with making sure that you understand the problem you're trying to solve. So at Ochsner, Fiona Winterbottom, which we all know, CNS at Ochsner, she was trying to solve a problem with sepsis detection. And she actually used staff that were on light duty, but she trained them. So she made sure she provided a highly trained individuals to do the process of answering these alerts that had been developed within the EHR. Because the problem we have now is in healthcare, we like to develop alerts and alarms and send information to people, and we really don't target who we send that information to. Maybe we send it to all of nursing. So as soon as you open up a patient's electronic chart, alerts start popping up, and they pop up at the wrong time, and maybe you're a novice and you don't even know what to do with those alerts. Maybe you don't even know what sepsis is. You just started at this organization last week, and you don't know what you're supposed to do with that alert. When you have a group of people who are highly trained and they are taught how to do surveillance for a specific problem, and they know what the goal is and what their interventions are supposed to be, you're going to be much more successful. And so you can, again, it's understanding the problem you're trying to solve and then determining, do we have staff available that could help us solve that problem? Maybe you have a lot of trouble hiring educators because you want your educators to have a certain level of experience before they become educators, right? You don't want a nurse 1 year out of school who's now your educator in critical care. But if you made that a virtual position, one educator could be an educator in critical care on multiple units because they don't have to physically travel. They can design education plans, and then they train the preceptors, and then they can assist from afar using an e-coaching, e-mentoring model like Lisa May has done and can talk about extensively. So again, you have to think about the problem you're trying to solve. Do you have the right expertise? Do you have open positions in another area you can't fill, and you can use those positions to staff your virtual department? Do you have people on light duty who have expertise that you could utilize in a virtual scenario?
Yeah, really good point, Lisa May. You like in a debate in this election year that we're in, your name was invoked, so you certainly have time to respond.
I loved what you said, Teresa, because with the conversation we're having here, and hopefully folks will realize that it's beyond the tasks. We're talking about the nurses that are the right fit to work in a virtual space and to provide specific resources that you need. And so e-coaching, for example, is a perfect example of what we can do or what we're able to leverage when we have so few nurse educators that are available, or expert nurses that are available, that at the push of a button or at the pickup of a phone call, you have a novice nurse in her department or his department have access to expertise. That does not necessarily need to be physically in that space. Also leveraging your experts for more than just one opportunity. So you might need an expert, as we mentioned, in sepsis, but there are other things that come along the way that you might figure out, you know what, virtual nursing might be the right solution. So we shouldn't keep ourselves in a box thinking that virtual nursing is just for this one thing and one task. as you build out your plan, think about other things, other challenges that you're having in different areas of your hospital, that your expert nurse, your knowledgeable nurses, your resources that can be leveraged. One other thing I wanted to mention, we were talking about turnover and we mentioned burnout very briefly. One statistic shows that burnout among nurses is about 37%. So 37% of nurses are reporting burnout. And usually it's your top performing nurses that are experiencing this burnout. Yes, it can be with your novice nurses as well, but it's mostly the nurses that are called upon the most. And having a virtual nursing option to provide them some respite from on-site care should be considered as part of innovative staffing models that you can rotate your nurses through if you choose that option. So I just wanted to highlight that. But I love this conversation, love where it's going, that we are within the four of us are thinking outside the box as to how we can leverage virtual nursing to do more than just tasks.
Right, exactly. And Julie, I'm going to turn to you. Before I do that, I want to make sure that folks know to put the questions in the chat or in the Q&A, as we're right at the 2:30 hours. So we'll have a couple more points of to make here, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A. And Julie, I'll let you add on to anything that you want to do on add to what Lisa May said around how to incorporate the programs into strategic planning. But we know that the reality is the bean counters will come out and want to determine how are we going to get a return on investment. I don't know that a value of investment has really taken hold. I know that there's some that have a VOI versus an ROI. I'd love to be able to think that there was, that we could say, here's our soft ROI and our, in our value for medicine and value for care numbers. But unfortunately, some of that is still has to be down to that hard ROI as well. So talk a little bit about how we have ways to demonstrate ROI, and that could be soft and hard or some other ways as well. But talk about what you've seen and what you've been able to work on in terms of demonstrating that return on investment.
Sure, I'll just give a real quick example, and this is not really recent. This goes back a number of years when I was at an organization that leveraged technology that had been put in place at a scaled level for EICU and applied that into a medical surgical environment. Started out with 76 beds, which is a pretty good chunk of beds, not just one unit, but we were able to demonstrate a half-a-day reduction in length of stay. We were able to demonstrate almost cut in half unplanned admissions to the ICU from the floor. And then even in advance of this organization thinking about e-sitters or how to use technology for falls, one of the surprising benefits of this program was that falls reduced from, I think, 3.3 per thousand to 2.1. Now, I don't know in this day and age if those numbers are good or bad anymore, but suffice it to say, it was reduced. And, you can use a variety of different numbers to quantify what that means in terms of turnaround time for beds, case mix index, savings, or revenue. And I would just touch briefly on the strategic planning piece. We have a different workforce now and going into the future. These are tech savvy, digital native professionals. And while a lot of these statistics that, like Lisa May pointed out, can be so discouraging, strategic planning can seem like an onerous, horrendous, time-consuming thing to participate in, but that's where we belong. And from the money perspective, I've never been involved in large strategic plans that didn't have large dollars attached to them. So I guess I would just say it's a matter of looking at what those key strategic priorities are, whether it's turnaround time or reducing labor expenses or getting care, hopping on the bandwagon of care into the home, I would argue that there's a role that virtual nursing can play in achieving any of those outcomes. So if you're not at the table, being able to help folks understand what that future looks like, yeah, it's hard after the fact to come in with a suggestion of maybe something that doesn't align with what the focus is.
Right, so important to align it into that strategic plan of the organization. Lisa May, on the return on investment topic, I know this is near and dear to your heart as well. Tell us what you think around how should we approach return on investment and any advice you can provide.
Well, I mentioned a couple of things earlier and worth repeating. We tend to group nursing into the environment of care, right? They're just part of the supplies. But in thinking about for example, hours per patient day, the virtual nurses able to be included in calculating those hours per patient day? We need to probably revise that, looking if we're going to implement a virtual nursing, they're part of the team, so their contribution to the care needs to be captured. Looking at RN turnover was another thing. So I mentioned it earlier that we have a really serious problem with first-year turnover. We know the cost of hiring a nurse and training that nurse is around $52,000. That turns out to be millions of dollars for hospitals that have a higher turnover rate. So if we can address that issue by capturing those nurses in a virtual nursing workflow, that alone, I think, would be a good get to send over to the bean counters to say, hey, I'm able to reduce my first year turnover by 5%, 10%, whatever it is that you want to target. And looking at the staffing model of how you are incorporating your nurses into things other than patient care that might have to do with data, performance improvement. A lot of performance improvement departments are trying to leverage multiple core measures, but maybe your virtual nurses could be involved in helping to supplement that. Case management is another area you could look at. So the list is long, but thinking about how to leverage the staff in the virtual space beyond what our normal traditional ideas are is really where the ROI will show itself. And it's going to be different for every hospital. It's going to be different for every scenario. But if you're using the right solution for the right case, you will get the right return on investment.
Yeah, good point. And Teresa, before I go to the open question that we have in the chat, and just a reminder to folks to add those into the Q&A or chat as we come to our last couple of minutes. I know that we've been working quite extensively on demonstrating this return on investment. Any quick thoughts on that as we wrap this section up?
Well, I'm glad that Lisa May mentioned the core measures. So we know that hospitals are struggling. CMS is not going to give out money. What they do is they take money from somebody else and they penalize those somebody else's because they didn't hit the targets. And that's the value-based purchasing within CMS. And then someone else who's done better actually gets the reward money. And so when we look at that, we know that we struggle as hospitals and health systems to meet those core measures. And now they're adding a new one, sepsis. And the average compliance to the bundle for the SEP1 bundle is about 59%. So that's where the target's starting at. But people are spending exorbitant amounts of money trying to meet their sepsis core measure SEP1 now, and many times making very minimal improvements. And virtual nursing has been used to identify sepsis and to improve the compliance to the bundle since I started it in 2004 at the health system I was at the time. And I know Julie's group also did the same thing in one of the health systems she was at, as well as Lisa May. So that is something that's a complex disease state and syndrome to identify, and then to ensure that you reach compliance. And so it's difficult to recruit sepsis coordinators, and then they turn over, and then you have no one who's really managing that education. But it's something that I've published on. You can use expert nurses that are highly trained in sepsis as knowledge translators for evidence-based practice, and they can improve your compliance to the bundle, reduce length of stay and complications, and improve your mortality rates. So again, thinking about those complex problems that you have in your organization today and figuring out how you can get the right nurses hired in with the expertise and the emotional intelligence to work with bedside teams to ensure that patients get the highest level of care that we can provide, so that we can have better outcomes, and then our reportable metrics are better, and then our financial stability improves.
And of course, ideally, your retention of your staff also improves as well. So we have quite a few questions in the Q&A, and I want to make sure we can get to those. Thank you all for your questions and answers, excuse me, for the for this section, and for those that have posted them in the Q&A. One question I have is around, there's a multi-pronged question actually around your suggestions on including a virtual nurse in HPPD and increased ratios. I'm not familiar with the acronym of HPPD, but perhaps you smart nurses are.
I think it's related to the hours per patient day, because immediately folks might think about, oh, do I have to increase ratios, meaning that nurses will have more patients that they need to care for. My suggestion would be to model out all the options, including the virtual nurse, in some of the options that you're considering, whether it is for a task-driven model or replacing a clinical educator supporting sepsis or supporting performance improvement, that should be part of the model. So you're going to come up with several models, but in making sure that the virtual nurse is included and that their role is part of that metric as you are trying to develop the best ROI that you will be implementing or tracking for your area. I would never suggest to remove a staff. As it is the text, we never talk about the text, but we know that that's a huge issue right now in terms of staffing. But looking at them as part of the team and modeling that out to be able to provide a good picture of the value and also the return on that investment.
Yeah, that was the further on in the question was around, should we remove other staff such as techs, et cetera? And then how would you begin to determine what that appropriate ratio would be based on unit type? So did put a nice bow on that one, Lisa May. Any additional thoughts from Teresa or Julie on that?
I would just say you need to be very careful, as Lisa May pointed out. I am still traumatized to some degree by some of the early decisions that, individuals made, thinking, oh, well, the ratio can just go from this to that, and we'll just pull this out. It didn't end well, let's just say. And I guess the other tidbit I would just say is also think about maybe like moving a role to virtual, so whether you go up or down, like taking a role, like we took like a APP who often rounded on many floors and put them into a virtual setting. The educator role, there's a variety of things that can be shifted rather than ramped up or ratcheted down, I think. But yeah, communication and collaboration with the stakeholders is essential, probably the most important aspect of virtual nursing and getting that rolling.
Yeah, I think we hear too often it's either, oh, we're going to remove staff or we're just going to increase the ratios at the bedside, and that of course turns off the bedside nurses to the whole idea of virtual nursing and a whole host of challenges there. So important to consider all the elements that you all have advised on. And so, Teresa, what nurse job satisfaction, or would nurse job satisfaction be another metric that could be included or considered? And there's a follow-on comment to that, meaning all nursing roles that might be involved in nursing, in virtual nursing, is that and a measure that we should be considering?
Absolutely. And I think Lisa May touched on the synergy model, which is one of the models that has come out of the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. But within those models, we also have healthy work environments. And there is actually a new version of healthy work environments. And there's tools in which we can measure the culture, the health of the culture, and the satisfaction. And it will also allow you to look at what are the areas that you need for improvement. So where can you actually improve? It's an anonymous survey. If you're the nurse leader who would like to start it up, it's free. And then when you log in and create that unit survey, you can send that unit survey out to anyone on your unit. I encourage groups that are doing virtual nursing to do this before they establish their virtual nursing program, because that will help you determine which units may need some work on the health of their environment before you introduce a change. If it's a unit that's struggling from a healthy work environment standpoint, you may want to put some measures in place to assist with that. But you can also measure, if you use a targeted approach to the problems, that you can solve those with virtual nursing and then measure it after. There are other satisfaction surveys that you can use. I encourage people to use validated instruments and not just create polling questions, because they can be leading, but to use validated. Some people have them embedded in their experience of work surveys. Maybe they have a tool that allows them to add additional questions. So there's ways to definitely measure it from both sides, from the virtual nursing side, as well as the staff who are collaborating and communicating with the virtual nursing team.
I've heard of the MISCARE survey. That's a survey that looks at the perceived staffing adequacy that could be considered as well. So I'm certain that having virtual nurses helping to lift the unit in terms of resources, that would be something that you could possibly track as well.
Absolutely. And this has been a great discussion. We're about a minute or so over time, and I can't thank
Talk about
you
it
all.
all day.
Oh, no, you're absolutely fine. We could keep talking. I just want to be respectful of everyone's schedules, and we try to time these out so folks have time to eat lunch on the West Coast as well. So thank you so much for your time today, for both the attendees and the panelists. You guys have been great. I want to make sure that everyone knows our 14th anniversary was on December 6th, excuse me, and we launched our Hey Blue service, and this is a question and answer knowledge-based service. All of the ladies on this call, as well as Fiona Winterbottom, who was mentioned, are also part of the team who will be part of the question and answer team for Hey Blue. So if you do have additional questions that you want to ask or have some burning resources that you might want to need, or whether that's staffing models or job descriptions or things like that, those are all contained in the Hey Blue service. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions around that. Julie, Lisa May, Teresa, it's always a pleasure, and thank you so much for your knowledge today. I'm smarter after having talked to all three of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a happy holiday to everybody.
You too.